I froze the moment my father's voice echoed across the chandelier-lit room. "Real success," he said with a smug smile, "doesn't come from following orders in the army." Polite laughter rippled around the table, except it wasn't polite to me. It was a dagger. What he didn't know was that 30 feet away, a contract killer was watching a 4-star general. And with one silent text from me, that general stood and obeyed while my father's fork stopped midair. That night, I learned family betrayal cuts deeper than any enemy, and revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it whispers. I wish I could tell you my father ever looked at me with pride. He didn't. Not when I graduated from West Point. Not when I earned my commission. And not when I came home wearing a uniform that represented years of sweat and sacrifice. In his world, none of it mattered. In his world, success came in sharp suits and corner offices, in real estate deals closed over cocktails, in being seen with the right people at the right table. That's why, when he invited me to his private dinner at the elite club downtown, I already knew it wasn't about family. It was about optics. I was a prop, his soldier daughter, an accessory he could display to make himself look grounded in patriotism, even if he mocked me behind my back. The night of the dinner, the air inside was thick with power. Senators, CEOs, investors, the kind of people whose laughter could move markets. My father thrived there, shaking hands, slapping shoulders, playing king in his marble kingdom. And me? I sat at his right hand, dressed in the one gown I owned that could pass for elegant, trying not to feel like a fraud. He raised his glass and began telling one of his stories, the kind he rehearsed like theater. Everyone leaned in, hanging on his words. He had a way of making even the mundane sound profound. But then his eyes flicked toward me, and I knew the sting was coming. Real success, he said smoothly, isn't about following orders or collecting government paychecks. It's about leading, about building something real. Money is made in the arena, not from the bleachers. The table laughed, a ripple of polite amusement. But it wasn't polite for me. It was humiliation, wrapped in crystal glasses and white linen. My father smirked, swirling his scotch, enjoying the way their laughter cut through me. I kept my face neutral, my posture unshaken. The army had taught me that silence could be sharper than words. But inside, my chest burned. This wasn't just an insult, it was a dismissal of everything I had built, every sacrifice I had made. And the cruelest part? He wasn't wrong about the room. They looked at me with that same half-smile he wore when introducing me. "This is my daughter, Emma. She's in the army." Like I was a footnote. Like my entire career was an anecdote, not an achievement. That night, I felt the full weight of family betrayal. Because when your own father mocks you in front of strangers, it cuts deeper than any enemy's words. I sat there, silent, but I promised myself something. One day, he would see. One day, the truth would make him choke on his own arrogance. I didn't know then that night was coming sooner than I thought. And when it came, it would become one of the best revenge stories I'd ever tell, not because I wanted vengeance, but because it proved that sometimes the quietest people in the room hold the most power. The laughter around the table kept ringing in my ears long after it died down. My father was still telling his polished anecdotes, sipping his scotch like he owned the air itself. But my focus had already shifted. Years in the military had trained me to scan a room, to catch patterns, to notice the one face that didn't belong. And then I saw him. Near the service entrance, half in shadow, stood a man whose posture screamed tension, even beneath the disguise of a tailored suit. Tall, lean, eyes like a predator studying prey. My stomach dropped. I knew that face. 2 years ago, it had been in a classified briefing, printed on a page I'd studied by lamplight in Kabul. Nikolai Varga, a contract assassin with confirmed kills across 3 continents. He had vanished from the grid. And now, here he was 30 feet away from me, in my father's world, in his gilded cage of power and wealth. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it, but when his gaze locked across the room, my blood went cold. He wasn't here to mingle. He wasn't sipping wine or pretending to network. He was here for a target. And then I saw who he was watching. General Marcus Hale, 4 stars. Army Chief of Staff. A man whose voice could move entire units across continents. He was deep in conversation with a senator, his back turned, completely unaware. My pulse spiked. I knew the signs. This wasn't curiosity. This was surveillance, precision, the kind of stillness only a professional carried. I glanced at my father. He was oblivious, laughing too loudly, enjoying the attention of his high-powered friends. In his eyes, I was nothing more than the daughter who followed orders. He had no idea that the same daughter was seconds away from saving one of the most powerful men in the military. That's the cruel irony of family betrayal. The people closest to you never imagine you could be stronger than they believe. My father thought I was insignificant. What he didn't know was that in this exact moment, I held more power than every billionaire in that room. I gripped the edge of my chair, steadying my breathing. Timing mattered. I couldn't act too soon, but if I waited too long, the price would be blood. My training kicked in. My world narrowed to 3 things: the assassin, the general, and the window of opportunity that was closing fast. The room buzzed on with talk of markets and mergers, laughter over cigars and brandy. Nobody noticed the silent storm forming under the chandelier light. But I noticed. I always noticed. And that was when I realized this wasn't just about an assassin, this was about my father too. Because whether he knew it or not, his world, the one he had built on arrogance, power, and dismissal, was about to collide with mine. This night wasn't going to end the way he had planned. It was going to end the way I decided. And that thought was the first flicker of a revenge story I never meant to write, but one I knew the world would never forget. I didn't blink. I couldn't. Every instinct screamed at me to move fast, decisive, silent. Under the table, my hand slipped into my clutch. My phone felt cold against my palm, but my training steadied me. This wasn't about panic. It was about precision. I opened the encrypted line, one reserved for emergencies no one could predict. Only 3 people had access. General Marcus Hale was one of them. My thumbs moved quickly. 4 words. Get up. Leave. Now. I hit send. My pulse slowed, waiting for confirmation. Across the table, Marcus paused mid-sentence. His hand went casually to his pocket, as if he were checking a routine message. His eyes flicked up just once, meeting mine. That tiny fraction of a second told me everything. Trust. Then he rose. Senator, let's finish this tomorrow, he said evenly. No one questioned it. No one suspected. But I watched as the assassin shifted, pushing off the wall with calculated purpose. For a heartbeat, I feared Marcus wouldn't make it. That Varga would strike in plain sight, right there in the glow of chandeliers and polished silverware. But then, like ghosts, 2 aides materialized. One shadowed Marcus's shoulder, the other blocked the corridor with practiced ease. A soft exchange, a quiet redirection. The geometry of the room bent against the assassin. He had no opening, he had no chance. The entire operation unfolded in silence. The kind of silence you only recognize if you've lived in war zones, where survival depends on small moves no one else notices. Around me, the room carried on. People laughed, forks scraped plates, wine glasses clinked. My father raised his brow, confused by Marcus's sudden exit. What is that about? He muttered, fork hovering above his plate. I didn't answer. I cut a piece of steak and lifted it to my mouth. My face stayed calm, but inside, my heart thundered. Because I knew the truth. One text from me had just shifted the balance of power in that room, and my father had no idea. This was the irony of family revenge stories. Sometimes revenge doesn't require shouting or confrontation. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is invisible The moment your enemy realizes the person they underestimated held the real power all along. I thought about every insult, every time he'd called me lowly, every time he paraded me as a prop but dismissed my career as meaningless. Tonight, without raising my voice, without even leaving my chair, I had done what none of his wealth or influence could. I had saved a life, and I had shaken the ground beneath his empire. That was the night I truly learned. The best revenge stories don't come with fireworks. They come with quiet precision. They come in the form of a single, undeniable truth. And for me, that truth was this: my father had no idea how much power I actually carried. The morning after the dinner, I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, watching steam curl into the cold air. My phone buzzed with updates I didn't need to read. I already knew something was coming. You can feel it, like the heaviness in the air before a storm. Then it happened. 3 sharp knocks. Not a neighbor, not delivery. The kind of knock that lands in your chest. By the time I reached my father's estate, black SUVs lined the driveway. Men and women in dark jackets moved with precision, radios crackling softly. Interpol. I walked past them without hesitation. Inside, my father stood in his robe, hair mussed, voice sharp with panic. "What is this? What's happening?" But even I could hear the cracks in his authority. The lead agent, Morales, opened a leather folder and held up a photograph. My father's face drained of color. It was him shaking hands with Nikolai Varga, the same assassin I had spotted at dinner, the same man who had followed Marcus Hale toward the corridor. My father's denial died on his lips. For once in his life, Richard Carter had no words. The agents spread through the house, opening drawers, boxing documents, dismantling his empire piece by piece. My father turned toward me, eyes flashing a mixture of accusation, shock, and something I couldn't name. He sipped my coffee. I didn't speak. Because this was it. This was the moment every revenge story waits for, the moment the scales tip, and the one who mocked you is forced to face truth. He had always said my medals meant nothing in the real world. Yet here, in his very own world of power and money, my silence carried more weight than all his deals combined. Neighbors peeked from their windows as evidence bags piled up. A laptop, a locked case, boxes of files, his fortress of lies collapsing under daylight. For years he had humiliated me, reduced me to nothing but a soldier in his grand narrative. And now? He stood barefoot on marble floors as Interpol stripped his empire bare. This wasn't just justice. It was poetic balance. Family betrayal had cut me for years, but this was where it ended. The beauty of it? I hadn't needed to scream, to fight, to beg for recognition. I hadn't even lifted my voice. A single message, a single decision, had brought everything crashing down. And as I stood there, I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of destruction. This was about overcoming adversity. About showing that true strength doesn't need applause, it stands on its own. That morning, watching him crumble, I understood one of life's hardest lessons. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living in your truth until the lies collapse around those who betrayed you. The trial drew headlines I never wanted to read. Real estate titan tied to international assassin. Family betrayal at the highest level. And somewhere in the middle of every article was my name. Not as his daughter, but as a witness. When I walked into the courtroom, the air felt heavier than body armor. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, and strangers whispered about me as if I couldn't hear. My father sat at the defense table, polished suit, hair slicked back, trying to look like the man he used to be. But his eyes gave him away, shadows rimmed them, the same fear I'd seen when Agent Morales showed him that photo. When they called my name, I rose. My heels clicked against the polished floor as I approached the stand. The Bible was cool beneath my palm. "Do you swear to tell the truth?" the clerk asked. "I do." The prosecutor started simple. "State your name and occupation." "My, Major Emma Carter, United States Army." I described the dinner. The laughter, the chandelier light, the assassin's stare, the silent text. My voice didn't shake. Every word was steady, because this wasn't about vengeance, it was about truth. Then came the defense. My father's lawyer leaned in with that smug smile I'd seen 1,000 times in corporate boardrooms. "Major Carter," he said, "would you say your military training makes you see threats where others see none?" I didn't flinch. "Number, I report what I observe. I recognized a face from a classified briefing. That's fact, not imagination." He smirked, lifting the photograph. "And this?" "A handshake. Couldn't it have been staged? Couldn't your father have been forced?" I met his eyes. A photograph is a moment. An investigation is a pattern. The pattern tells the truth. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The lawyer sat back, frowning. My father's jaw tightened. Then he spoke something he rarely did without control. "Emma," his voice carried, shaky but sharp. "Be reasonable. Undo this. Say you misread the room. Family doesn't betray family." My chest burned, but my voice was calm. Family doesn't hire killers. Family doesn't launder blood money. Family doesn't humiliate their own children to build an empire. The silence afterward was suffocating. For once, he couldn't twist the narrative. For once, the room saw him as he was. And in that silence, I felt it defiance as strong as steel. This wasn't just my testimony, this was my stand. One of those inspirational stories people whisper about later, the kind that proves overcoming adversity means telling the truth even when it costs you. As I stepped down from the stand, I realized something. This was no longer his courtroom, his empire, his stage. It was mine. And that, I knew, was the kind of revenge story that stays written forever. The investigation peeled back my father's empire like layers of rotting wood. On the surface, he had built a dynasty: real estate towers, luxury developments, charity galas, but beneath it all were cracks so deep, no one could ignore them anymore. Interpol traced money transfers through boutique firms, shell companies, even art auctions. Each step carefully disguised, but the pattern was undeniable. My father hadn't just dabbled in shady deals, he had aligned himself with people like Nikolai Varga's employers, men who used wealth and violence as interchangeable tools. I sat in the back of one briefing room, staring at charts of bank transactions, my name nowhere on the board, just another soldier in the audience. But I couldn't shake the truth. Those red lines and arrows weren't just evidence, they were a map of betrayal. A father who once lectured me about paying credit card bills on time was laundering blood money across borders. The prosecutors told me something else that night, something that hit harder than the photo of his handshake. Years earlier, my father had taken what he called a bridge loan from a shadowy financier. He thought it was business, but it was a leash. The interest wasn't financial, it was political. They wanted access to senators, to generals, to men like Marcus Hale. And my father? He delivered. That realization crushed me more than his insults ever had. All those years he mocked my military career, called it servitude, said I was collecting a government paycheck. Yet he was the one serving. Not the country, not the family, but men who traded lives like poker chips. Vanessa, his young wife, was gone by then. She filed for divorce the moment the Interpol vans pulled up. She'd married him for power, not prison time. She disappeared into the kind of anonymity only influencers with fake smiles know. And my father, once untouchable, was left alone with the wreckage he created. That's the price of family betrayal. It doesn't just break trust, it erases legacies. His name, once engraved on plaques and skyscrapers, was now stamped on case files and evidence bags. Watching it unfold, I realized something that would stay with me forever. Betrayal is expensive. Not in money, but in what it costs the soul. My father traded loyalty for leverage, traded family for fear, and when the bill came due, he couldn't pay it. These were the life lessons I never wanted, but they were mine all the same. Sometimes the people who raise you are the same people you'll have to rise against. And sometimes the greatest revenge story isn't about striking back, it's about standing tall while they collapse under the weight of their own lies. My father's collapse was proof. Proof that arrogance doesn't protect you. Proof that blood doesn't excuse betrayal. Proof that the strongest legacies aren't written in money but in truth. The day the gavel fell, I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I didn't even feel triumph. People expected me to walk out of that courthouse glowing with satisfaction. The soldier daughter who finally brought down the father who mocked her. But revenge, at least the kind that lasts, isn't about applause. It's about balance. My father pled guilty on several counts, his voice flat but steady. It was the first time he ever admitted weakness in public. Not to me, not to the family he betrayed, but to the record. And maybe that was enough. For once, he stopped pretending. Weeks later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. Plain envelope. No return address. I knew the handwriting instantly: sharp, deliberate strokes that had once signed multi-million-dollar contracts. Inside, just a few lines: I never thought you had that kind of strength. I read it once. I folded it away. Strength? Number. It wasn't strength that moved me that night at the dinner table, it was trust. Trust in my training, trust in my instincts, trust that I could act without waiting for permission. That's the difference between his world and mine. He built empires on manipulation. I built mine on trust. One crumbled. The other stands. Over time, the headlines faded. The empire he built turned into lawsuits and fire sales. The woman he married moved on. His name became a cautionary tale instead of a legacy. And me? I kept showing up. For my unit, for my country, for myself. That's the hidden truth inside family revenge stories. The best revenge stories aren't about destruction. They're about survival. They're about proving that overcoming adversity means you don't just live through betrayal, you grow beyond it. I don't carry bitterness now. I carry clarity. The life lessons are carved deep. Family can betray you faster than strangers. Silence can be sharper than screams. True power doesn't come from applause, it comes from standing firm when no one believes in you. When people ask me if I regret it, if I regret testifying, if I regret watching my father fall, I tell them the same thing. I regret nothing that protected lives and revealed truth. Because this was never about me versus him. It was about me versus the lie he lived. And that is why my story will always stand as one of those true stories people share late at night, when they need hope, when they need proof that justice still exists. My revenge didn't roar, it whispered. But its echo will last forever. In the end, my story wasn't just about revenge, it was about truth. My father once believed my silence meant weakness. But that silence was the very thing that gave me strength. He lost everything he built on arrogance, and I found everything I needed in clarity. This wasn't only a revenge story. It was a lesson in resilience, a reminder that betrayal doesn't define you, your response does. Family can cut deeper than enemies, but sometimes the sharpest wound becomes the sharpest weapon for growth. For anyone carrying scars from family betrayal, know this. You don't need applause. You don't need validation. Sometimes the best revenge stories are simply true stories of survival, courage, and balance. That is the most powerful, inspirational story you can live. So I'll leave you with these questions. What would you do if your own father mocked you, then begged for your silence in court? Am I wrong for cutting him off, even when part of me still wanted to believe he could change? Share your thoughts in the comments, I want to hear your side, because these aren't just my life lessons, they belong to all of us.